My husband brought his ex and her son to pick me up from the maternity ward, fully expecting me to remain the same submissive wife I was before I went into labor. Who would have thought that a nurse opening a medical chart and uttering a single phrase would make him turn pale right in the middle of the hospital lobby? I came to when the harsh white fluorescent lights of the recovery room were still blurring before my eyes. The epidural hadn't completely worn off. The lower half of my body felt numb, as if it didn't belong to me, while the C-section incision on my abdomen throbbed with a searing ache. Every breath felt as though someone had placed a block of dry ice on my skin and was slowly pressing down. The rhythmic clatter of the gurney wheels against the linoleum, the hushed whispers of the nurses, the faint, distant cry of a newborn somewhere down the hall, it all blended into an unfamiliar, dizzying hum. I tried to open my eyes. My throat was parched, and my lips trembled for a long time before I could mentally form the words, "Where is my baby?" When the nurse finally wheeled me into the postpartum suite, she placed a tiny, pink swaddled bundle right next to me. The little girl let out a single squeak, quiet and high-pitched, like a kitten lost in the rain. I wanted to touch her cheek, but an IV was taped to the back of my hand, and my wrist was too weak to lift. I could only turn my head and stare at my daughter through the soft receiving blanket. Her tiny face was still red, her lips moving instinctively as if searching for her mother. In that moment, I felt like all the agony I had endured was worth it. I thought that as long as my daughter was healthy, I could swallow all the past grievances in my marriage. I was wrong. My husband, Vance Sterling, stood at the foot of my hospital bed. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt, a charcoal-tailored wool coat draped over his arm, far too immaculate to fit into this room that reeked of antiseptic and postpartum sweat. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He didn't ask if the surgery had been dangerous. He didn't even lean in to get a proper look at our child. His gaze merely brushed past the pink bundle in the nurse's arms and locked onto a line on the newborn's bassinet card. Female. The nurse hesitated slightly, but answered in a warm tone. Yes, a little girl. 6 pounds, 8 ounces, perfectly healthy, with a great set of lungs. Congratulations to your family. Vance's face instantly frosted over. He frowned, looking as though the nurse had just delivered terribly disappointing news. I lay there, my vision darkening from the pain in my abdomen, but my heart ached far worse. I waited for him to step closer to the baby. I waited for him to say the only thing that mattered, that it was wonderful. But he remained silent. Then, he looked at me. His voice was low and sterile. Sloane, I'm going to say this right now so you don't build any illusions. Marlo and I have a son, Declan. He is the true bloodline of the Sterling family. Your child has no right to claim anything in our estate. Dead silence fell over the room. The relative of the patient in the neighboring bed behind the curtain even stopped rustling her plastic bags. The nurse standing next to me froze, her eyes widening, utterly disbelieving that a husband could say something so vile to his wife's face right after a major abdominal surgery. And I heard every single word. Each syllable dropped like a dull knife, slicing into my still bleeding wound. Your child has no right to the Sterling family. I didn't cry. Maybe it was the lingering anesthesia, or maybe the physical pain was just too overwhelming for tears to form. Or maybe, in that precise moment, something inside me truly died. I stared at Vance for a long time, then gave a faint nod. Okay. He looked slightly taken aback. He had braced himself for me to weep, to berate him, to throw a hysterical fit, but he hadn't expected this eerie calm. A flicker of confusion crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by his usual, habitual irritation. Don't play the victim, Sloane. Marlo has had a hard time raising a child alone all these years. Declan is my mother's eldest grandson. She's already acknowledged him. You just gave birth. Rest, and don't make a scene. I let out a weak scoff. Only when I smiled did I realize how cracked my lips were. Even to me, that faint smile felt foreign. I'm making a scene? At that moment, my mother-in-law, Constance, marched in from the hallway. She was holding a crimson Yeti tumbler, and her face lacked even a drop of the joy you'd expect from a woman who had just become a grandmother. Hearing Vance's last words, she slammed the tumbler down on the bedside table with a thud. Sloane, you're an educated woman. You should understand, Constance began smoothly. You had a girl. Eventually, She'll get married and take someone else's name. Declan is the root of the Sterling legacy. A smart woman looks to the future. Saying this, she leaned over and reached out, intending to pull back the blanket to look at my daughter's face. The baby had just fallen asleep. Startled by the aggressive movement, she flinched, furrowing her tiny, non-existent brows. My heart seized. "Don't touch my child." My voice wasn't loud, but it was so glacial that it surprised even me. Constance's face immediately darkened. "I am her grandmother. I can't even take a look?" I stared pointedly at her hand. "The birth certificate hasn't been filed yet." "Who are you to my child?" "As of right now, legally, you are nobody," Vance scoffed. "Sloane, what are you getting at? You just gave birth and you're already using the baby to blackmail me?" I didn't look at him anymore. I turned to the nurse, making a concerted effort to enunciate every word. "Excuse me. Please page my attending physician. I need to immediately revoke my HIPAA authorization and change the emergency contact on my file." The nurse stood paralyzed, her gaze darting between Vance and me. She had likely seen her fair share of domestic disputes on the maternity floor, but a wife demanding to strip her husband of his medical access minutes after a C-section, right to his face, was a rarity. Vance's expression finally shifted. "What are you doing?" I took a slow, deep breath. The staples on my incision pulled tight. The agony was so sharp that my palms broke out in a cold sweat. "Nothing. You just said it yourself. This is Sloane's child. She has no right to claim anything from the Sterling family. Which means, from this second forward, my daughter and I are none of your business." He was stunned by my icy tone. In the past, I had always spoken to him affectionately. I was the patient, compromising wife. Today, from a hospital bed, I was speaking to him like a hostile stranger. "Watch your mouth. I am your husband." I was so exhausted I didn't have the energy to argue. I slipped my hand under my pillow, feeling around for my iPhone. Luckily, right before they wheeled me into the OR, a heavy sense of dread had washed over me, and I had hit record on my voice memos app. The screen lit up. The red recording wave was still pulsing. Every word he said, every word his mother said, captured. Seeing the screen, Vance turned ashen and lunged forward to snatch the phone. The nurse immediately stepped between him and the bed. "Sir, the patient is fresh out of surgery. Do not agitate her. I am her husband. I have the right." I clutched the phone to my chest, looking at him with a startlingly level gaze. "Vance, your daughter was born, and you didn't even look at her. You said you and Marlo have a son. You said my daughter has no right to the Sterling estate. I have it all right here." He gritted his teeth, dropping his voice to a menacing hiss. "What exactly do you want, Sloane?" In the past, the moment he gave me that look, I would automatically back down. I was terrified of breaking our home, terrified of putting him in an awkward position between me and his mother. I was terrified my child would grow up in a broken family. I used to think that endless patience was the key to marital happiness. But today, lying in this bed with a burning incision and a newborn daughter beside me, I realized something. A home built on a foundation of contempt isn't a home. It's a cage. I looked at him and articulated every word softly but clearly. "I don't want a single damn thing from the Sterling family." Vance's face softened slightly, while Constance let out a cold, dismissive snort. "Good. Perfect," she muttered. I continued. "But starting today, neither of you will ever touch a single thing that belongs to me." Nobody said another word. I unlocked my phone and sent a quick text to Blair, my college roommate and a ruthless family law attorney. I had the baby. Start drafting the divorce papers and lock down my assets. Blair had advised me to do this countless times. She used to say, "Sloane, don't turn your marriage into a charity project." Back then, I defended Vance. I said he was stressed because of his new tech startup. I said his mother was aging and had heart issues, which made her difficult. I said I felt bad for Marlo because being a single mom was hard. I thought he was just a sentimental man who felt guilty about abandoning his past. Only today did I realize he wasn't tethered to his past. He just viewed my empathy as an unlimited black card, swiping it whenever he pleased. The attending doctor arrived swiftly. After hearing my request, she verified, "Sloane, You are confirming the removal of Vance Sterling as your emergency contact and HIPAA proxy, and transferring all medical decision-making rights to your mother, Eleanor Kensington. Is that correct? I nodded. Correct. All procedures and decisions regarding the infant are to be cleared exclusively by me or my mother. Understood. Vance stood nearby, his expression growing darker by the second. Sloane, don't do something you'll regret. I looked at my daughter lying next to me. She was so tiny. Her little fist was curled tight, resembling an unopened rosebud. With the hand free of the IV, I gently brushed her cheek. Her skin was incredibly soft and warm. It was this warmth that violently pulled me out of my past, out of my blind devotion. I had a child now, but that didn't mean I had to endure abuse for her sake. On the contrary, because of her, I absolutely could not allow her to grow up surrounded by people who despised her from the first day she drew breath. That evening, Vance didn't stay at the hospital. His phone rang, and his tone instantly melted into honey. Marlo, don't cry. I'm on my way. Declan's fever spiked again? Okay. I'm flying. He left quickly, not even sparing a backward glance at me or his daughter. Constance followed him out, tossing one last remark over her shoulder. All women suffer in childbirth. Stop turning it into a tragedy. It's only right that Vance goes to Declan. The boy grew up without a father. The door clicked shut, and silence finally reclaimed the room. The nurse came in to check my bandages. Her movements were far more gentle and cautious than before. She looked at me hesitantly. Sloane, are you really going to handle all this on your own? I stared at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. My incision burned. My chest was engorged and aching, and my heart was shattered. Yet, strangely, amidst all this pain, my mind had never been clearer. I said quietly, No, I'm not alone. She looked at me, confused. I turned my head toward my daughter. My voice dropped to a whisper. I have myself. That night, the pain kept me awake. My daughter slept peacefully in the clear plastic bassinet beside the bed. I grabbed my phone and started downloading PDF statements from my Bank of America and Chase apps, covering the last 4 years. Constance's cardiac bypass out-of-pocket costs, $120,000. Seed capital for Vance's tech startup, $250,000. Renovations for the Sterling family's historic estate in Lake Forest, $180,000. Declan's tuition at an elite private academy, $45,000 a year, plus countless minor expenses. Constance's expensive supplements, premium health insurance premiums, and the $4,000 monthly rent for Marlo's luxury apartment in the Gold Coast. Living expenses. Holiday gifts I bought in his name so he wouldn't look bad. Every single transfer had a clear memo line. In the past, I never brought these up, terrified of bruising his fragile male ego. Only now did I realize that people stop valuing the person who never asks for the bill. Around 3 a.m., Blair texted back. Save everything to a secure cloud drive. Do not engage in an open conflict for the next 5 days. Heal. Gather your strength. I'm coming to the hospital tomorrow. I locked the screen. In the dim glow of the monitors, my daughter suddenly stirred, her tiny hand opening and closing. Ignoring the searing pain in my gut, I shifted closer to her bassinet and whispered, Ainsley, from today on, Mommy is going to protect you. The baby smacked her lips, as if she heard me. I watched her for hours. In 5 days, Vance was supposed to come and take me home. He probably still thought that all he needed to do was show up with a bouquet of overpriced flowers and mumble a half-assed apology, and I would, just like the last 4 years, wipe my tears and go back to the Sterling house. But this time, he miscalculated. I was no longer that Sloane. The 5 days in the hospital crawled by at an agonizing pace. It was so slow I could hear every drop falling in my IV chamber, the squeak of rubber soles in the hallway, the tiny grunts Ainsley made in her sleep. Vance never came. He only sent 2 texts. The first. Marlo posted that photo by accident. Stop overthinking it. The second. Declan has a high fever. I can't leave him. I'll pick you up on discharge day. I read them and didn't reply. Before, His shallow excuses would have been enough for me to gaslight myself into believing he was just overwhelmed. Now, it was just comical. A man who could stay awake all night for his ex's son, but couldn't find 5 minutes to look at his own flesh and blood. On the morning of the 5th day, the doctor checked my incision and cleared me for discharge. My mother arrived very early. She wore a tailored camel coat, her hair impeccably swept back, but heavy dark circles rested under her eyes from sleepless nights. Walking into the room, she didn't scold me. She didn't ask why I had waited 4 years to tell her the truth about my marriage. She simply leaned down, placed a cool hand on my forehead, and asked in a choked voice, "Does it hurt badly, sweetheart?" Those few words almost broke my composure. For 5 days, the man who was supposed to ask me that question never did. Mom looked over at Ainsley sleeping in the bassinet. Her trembling hand gently smoothed the edge of the blanket. What an angel my granddaughter is. I turned my head away, terrified she would see my tears. Blair arrived shortly after. She carried a sleek leather briefcase containing the discharge papers, a copy of my medical lockdown forms, and the spreadsheet of assets I had sent her. Blair took one look at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of fierce compassion and legal bloodlust. "Remember what we talked about. If they show up today, do not get into a screaming match. You're still healing physically. Let them dig their own graves with their words." I nodded, though I knew deep down that a narcissist like Vance wouldn't believe I was actually leaving until a door was slammed shut in his face. Around 10 a.m., my mother pushed my wheelchair into the massive hospital lobby. I held Ainsley against my chest. She was bundled in a cream-colored organic cotton swaddle my mom had bought. Her tiny face was pressed against me, her breathing so light I was afraid to shift my weight. The lobby was bustling, patients being discharged, visitors arriving, names called over the PA, elevator doors pinging. It was chaotic, but inside, I felt a profound, chilling tranquility. Vance appeared by the elevators. He wore a sharp black peacoat and held a lavish bouquet of white lilies. From a distance, anyone would think he was a devoted, repentant husband arriving to take his family home. But trailing right behind him was Marlo. She wore a pristine beige cashmere dress, her makeup done in a flawless no-makeup look, and she was holding Declan by the hand. As soon as the boy saw Vance, he looked up and yelled, "Daddy! I want to hold the baby!" That daddy echoed across the marble lobby so loudly that several people turned their heads. Vance looked slightly flustered, but he didn't correct the boy. He walked over and extended the lilies toward me. "Sloane, you've been mad long enough. Let's go home. My mom had the housekeeper make your favorite soup. I didn't take the flowers." The bouquet hung in the air, looking pathetic and hollow. Marlo took a step forward, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Sloane, please don't misunderstand. Declan just really wanted to see his little sister. Vance has been a wreck worrying about you these past few days. But Declan's fever was so high, Vance just couldn't split himself in two." I looked down at Ainsley. She was sleeping so soundly, as if the filth of this world had absolutely nothing to do with her. Vance's expression darkened. "Don't embarrass me in front of everyone." I tilted my head, meeting his gaze. "Do you even remember what shame is? Your wife had her abdomen sliced open 5 days ago, and you were playing house with your ex's son. Today you come to pick up your biological daughter, and you bring your mistress and her kid along. I thought you'd be proud of yourself." He ground his jaw. "Do you have to be this vile?" Suddenly, Declan yanked his hand away from Marlo, stomped toward my wheelchair, and reached his grubby hands toward Ainsley's face. "I want to see the baby." I instantly recoiled, shielding my daughter with my body. Vance frowned. "He's just a little boy. What are you guarding her from?" Marlo hurriedly pulled Declan back, her eyes welling up with tears right on cue. "Declan, sweetie." "No. I guess the baby's mommy doesn't want us here." The moment she said that, the expressions of the bystanders shifted. Suddenly, I looked like the bitter, petty wife bullying a poor single mother and a sweet child. Empowered by the public sympathy, Vance took a step forward and reached his arms out to take Ainsley. "Give me the baby." "I am her father." I clutched my daughter tighter and said coldly, "Don't you dare touch her." At that exact moment, the charge nurse, responsible for my discharge, the same nurse who had witnessed the horror show in my recovery room, stepped firmly in front of my wheelchair. "Sir, please step back." You cannot touch the patient or the infant without her explicit consent. Vance sneered. I am her husband. I am the father. The nurse opened her clipboard, her voice calm but carrying the absolute authority of hospital protocol. Excuse me, sir, but 5 days ago, Sloane Sterling updated her HIPAA authorization, emergency contacts, and proxy directives. According to our legal system, you are an unauthorized party. You have no legal standing to facilitate this discharge, and you may not make contact with the minor without the mother's approval. The lobby went dead silent for 5 seconds. Vance's hands froze mid-air. The expensive lilies slipped from his grasp, hitting the polished floor with a wet slap. White petals scattered around his Italian leather shoes. He looked from the nurse to me, all color draining from his face. You actually did that? I didn't answer. My mother handed the final signed forms to the registration desk. Blair, standing beside us, neatly collected our copies and said smoothly, Discharge is complete. The black SUV is waiting at the valet. As my mother began to wheel me away, Vance suddenly lunged after us, raising his voice. Sloane! On what grounds did you erase me from the medical files? I am your husband. I turned my head. For the first time in 4 years, I was completely immune to his anger. You said it yourself. This is Sloane's child, and she has no right to anything in the Sterling family. I simply honored your wishes. He stopped, breathless. Marlo, standing behind him, tugged nervously at his sleeve. Her face was pale. Vance, let's not fight here. Everyone is staring. Vance ripped his arm away from her. It was the first time I had ever seen him physically dismiss Marlo in front of me. Some people never appreciate what they have until they break it. And when it shatters, they panic, cutting their hands to shreds trying to glue the shards back together. But it's never the same. My mother pushed me toward the revolving doors. Vance trailed behind us. Go back to the house. We will discuss the rest of this later. My mother stopped the wheelchair and physically blocked his path. She is not going back to your house, Vance. Eleanor, this is a matter between a husband and a wife. My mother glared at him with such venom that he actually flinched. Your wife had major surgery 5 days ago. You brought another woman and her child to pick her up from the hospital. And now you have the nerve to talk about matters between husband and wife? Do you have any shred of decency left in your soul? Vance looked past her to me. His voice took on that pleading, manipulative softness. Sloane, I know you're furious. But Declan really needed me. Marlo has raised him alone for so long. I couldn't just abandon them, then go take care of them, I said simply. He blinked, thrown off guard. Ainsley and I don't need your care anymore. Ainsley? He repeated the name as if it were a foreign word. Who gave you the right to name the child? I let out a dry, breathy laugh. You don't even know what time she was born. What gives you the right to ask about her name? His face went from pale to a sickly green. Just then, his iPhone buzzed in his pocket. He answered it, and before he could even speak, his expression warped into utter shock. What do you mean it's declined? That card has always worked. Run it again. I lowered my eyes. The supplementary Platinum Amex he had been using for the last 4 years was tied to my premarital trust account. I had canceled it at 8 p.m. the night before. My mother's chartered SUV pulled up right to the curb. As the heavy doors shut, I looked through the tinted glass. Vance stood paralyzed on the hospital sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, with Marlo and Declan huddled near him in the cold Chicago wind. 5 days ago, he declared that my daughter and I had no right to the Sterling wealth. 5 days later, he was discovering that half of what propped up the Sterling wealth had been quietly bankrolled by me. I held Ainsley tighter to my chest and pressed a kiss to her forehead. As the car merged into city traffic, I never looked back. Waiting for me was my own modest condo in Lincoln Park, my mother, my shark of a lawyer, a mountain of printed bank statements, and the brutal legal war I knew was coming. The Sterlings wouldn't let me walk away so easily. My mother brought me to my condo in Lincoln Park, the place I owned before I got married. It was a spacious 2-bedroom. The balcony looked out over a row of old elm trees. In the afternoon, the sun filtered through the sheer linen drapes, leaving a remarkably warm glow on the hardwood floors. Right after the wedding, Vance had manipulated me into moving into the massive Sterling estate in Lake Forest, claiming it was closer to his tech incubator and easier for us to take care of his ailing mother. Back then, I thought living together was a way to bond the family. Only later did I realize that easier to take care of meant I had to wake up at 5:30 a.m. to make Constance her specific gluten-free oats, check her blood pressure every evening, manage her pill organizers, and drive her to her specialists on weekends. Vance's contribution was standing nearby and saying, "Sloan, you work so hard," and that was the extent of it. My mother had kept a cleaning service coming to this condo twice a month, so when I walked in carrying Ainsley, it didn't smell stale. The linens were fresh, and a crystal vase of white hydrangeas sat on the kitchen island. I sat on the edge of the bed. A sharp pain shot through my incision, making me sweat, but my soul felt lighter. This was my home. Not a room where my mother-in-law could barge in without knocking. Not a place where Marlo could drop off Declan and play the weeping victim, claiming her son needed a father figure. And certainly not the sprawling mansion whose renovations I paid for, but where I was never once treated like the lady of the house. Mom placed Ainsley into a brand new snoo bassinet, turned around, and poured me a glass of room-temperature water. "Blair emailed the draft of the divorce settlement for you to review." I leaned back against the pillows, my voice hoarse. "Mom, do you think I'm moving too fast?" She looked at me for a long time. There was no judgment in her eyes, only profound sorrow. "My only regret is that you didn't move fast enough to do this years ago." Hearing that, I finally broke. I had tried to be made of iron for 5 days in that hospital. I tried to stay perfectly composed in front of Vance, Marlo, and the pitying stares of strangers. But in front of my mother, the dam collapsed. Mom sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped her arms around me. "Sloan, I saw you were drowning. But every time I brought it up, you said Vance was stressed about his investors. You said Constance was just irritable from her heart condition. You said you felt terrible for Marlo raising a boy alone. I was terrified of pushing you too hard, afraid you'd just put your walls up and defend them harder. So I'll only ask you one thing now. Are you truly done?" I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and looked at Ainsley sleeping soundly. Blair arrived in the early afternoon. She dropped a thick, imposing stack of legal folders onto my bedside table. Her voice was as sharp and rhythmic as a gavel. "First, the hospital has verified your proxy changes and flagged Vance in their security system. Second, your postpartum nurse is willing to go on record in an affidavit about Vance's emotional abuse and aggressive behavior hours after your surgery. Third, the audio recording from the hospital is admissible and establishes his explicit verbal abandonment of his parental claims to the infant. Fourth, I have started itemizing the financial transfers over the last 4 years." I stared at the mountain of paper. My 4-year marriage suddenly looked like nothing more than a grotesque ledger of debts. Every page was a time I compromised. Every dollar figure was a moment I lied to myself, saying that family doesn't keep score. And the reward for all my generosity was being told my newborn baby was worthless. Blair flipped to a specific tab. "You made 3 large, distinct wire transfers directly to Marlo, correct?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Vance said Declan needed tuition for his prep school, and he felt emasculated asking his investors for an advance. I thought the little boy didn't deserve to suffer." Blair closed her eyes and let out a long, heavy sigh. "You aren't stupid, Sloan. You're just fatally empathetic." That hit harder than a slap. I bowed my head, but before I could reply, the intercom buzzed frantically. The video screen on the wall flared to life, showing Constance's furious face. Behind her stood Vance's uncle and a cousin. She was hammering her fists against the heavy glass doors of the lobby. Her shrill voice bled through the intercom speaker. "Sloan, open this door! What do you mean, taking my granddaughter to your mother's place? A Sterling child belongs in the Sterling house." Mom looked at me. I shook my head. "Don't let them in." Outside, Constance started screaming louder. "Don't think just because you squeezed out a baby you can hold us hostage. The Sterling family has provided for you." "So what if Vance has some ties on the side? Marlo is his childhood friend, and Declan is his son too. The fact that you can't accept a mother and her child just proves how petty and jealous you are." Neighbors in the lobby were starting to stop and stare. Blair immediately pulled out her phone and started recording the intercom feed. Mom walked to the console and hit the talk button. "Constance, this is my daughter's private property. If you continue to harass us, I will have the doorman call the Chicago police." Constance sneered into the camera. Don't threaten me with the cops, Eleanor. I came to see my grandchild. What's illegal about that? I gripped the edge of the mattress and forced myself up. My core screamed in agony, but I asked Blair to help me walk to the intercom. Standing behind my mother, I looked right into the camera lens. Her name is Ainsley Kensington. Constance's eyes bugged out. Kensington? Who gave you permission to give her your maiden name? You're out of your mind. Vance is her father. I smiled, a cold, dead thing. It was your son who explicitly stated that this is Sloane's child, and she has no right to the Sterling estate. I am simply executing your family's wishes. Constance's face turned magenta. He spoke out of anger. Enough of this nonsense. Are you really going to hold a grudge? Didn't you say girls just marry away? And only Declan is the root of the family? Since your family doesn't need a granddaughter, I will raise her myself. Constance pointed a trembling finger at the camera. Her tone turned venomous. You'll raise her? With what money? I bet you're still swiping Vance's credit cards right now. The moment those words left her mouth, a freezing silence filled my condo. I looked at Blair. She understood immediately. She pulled a highlighted summary sheet from the financial dossier. I took it, hit the lobby door release button, and told the doorman over the mic, "Give this paper to the woman throwing a tantrum." We watched on the screen as the doorman handed Constance the printout. Take a very close look at who has been spending whose money for the last 4 years. Constance lowered her eyes to the paper. Line 1. Northwestern Cardiology. Constance Sterling Bypass. $120,000. Line 2. Lake Forest Estate Renovations. $180,000. Line 3. Sterling Tech Ventures Seed Fund. $250,000. Beneath that, Declan's tuition, Marlowe's Gold Coast rent, Constance's organic meal deliveries. We watched the blood completely drain from Constance's face on the monitor. The uncle and cousin behind her leaned in to look at the paper. Their expressions instantly morphed from righteous indignation to profound humiliation. Constance crumpled the paper in her fist. We are family. How do you have the gall to nickel and dime us like this? I looked at the screen without an ounce of rage, just absolute zero apathy. Before, we were family, which is why I never kept score. But since you announced my daughter and I have no rights, I decided it was time to do the accounting. At that moment, the flashing lights of a CPD cruiser reflected in the lobby glass. 2 officers walked in. Blair had called them the second. Constance started banging. Constance immediately dropped her volume, her aggressive posturing vanishing into thin air. I leaned against the wall, holding my aching abdomen. But for the first time in 4 years, I watched the arrogant Sterling family forced into dead silence. Before the cops escorted her out, Constance glared at the camera and spat. You're going to regret leaving Vance. Who wants a divorced woman with baggage? I cut the intercom feed, looked at Ainsley sleeping peacefully, and whispered, I am enough for myself. That evening, I texted Vance a photo of the cover page of the petition for dissolution of marriage. I added a brief message. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Meet me at Blair's office to discuss the settlement terms. He replied almost instantly. Stop pressuring me. I stared at the screen, then typed, You were the ones who pushed me out the door. The next day, I arrived at Blair's sleek downtown office at 2:50 p.m. My mom stayed at the condo with Ainsley. I walked in, clutching the thick binder of documents. Every step sent a jolt of pain pulling at my stitches. But I refused to use a wheelchair today. I wanted to walk into this room on my own 2 feet. It was painful, it was slow, but it was a physical reminder that from today onward, no one dictated my life but me. I sat in the glass-walled conference room, watching the minute hand on the wall clock tick away. 3, 3, 15, 3:30. Vance never showed up. Blair looked up from her laptop. You expected this, didn't you? I gripped my phone. Yes. He thinks stalling gives him power. Right then, a text from Vance popped up. Urgent crisis at the startup. Can't make it. We'll talk another day. Reading those words, I felt remarkably zen. In the past, if he said he was busy, I would spiral into anxiety, worrying he wasn't eating, stressing that the venture capitalists were breathing down his neck. Now, all I saw was a coward hiding behind the word, work. Blair leaned over, read the text, and smirked. Perfect. Documented refusal to cooperate. Judges love that during asset division. On the Uber ride home, Vance called me 3 times. I let them all go to voicemail. Finally, he sent an audio message. His tone was exasperated. Sloan, what exactly is your endgame here? Divorce isn't a game. Can you grow up for 5 minutes? I played it on speaker so Blair could hear. She let out a sharp laugh. The man who brought his side piece to his wife's postpartum room is lecturing people on growing up. Incredible. I didn't send a voice note back. I just typed, "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I am going to the Lake Forest house to collect my personal property. Be there. And tell your mother not to touch my things." Vance replied immediately. "So, you still remember that's your house?" I looked at the text, then replied, "I am only coming for what legally belongs to me." The next morning, Blair and a private security contractor accompanied me. My mother wanted to come, but I insisted she stay. Ainsley was too small, and I refused to let her breathe the suffocating air of the Sterling estate. The SUV pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates in Lake Forest, the gates I had picked out and paid for, the slate roof I had replaced, the landscaping I had funded. I used to think this estate was my home. Turns out, I was just the set designer funding a stage play called The Happy Family. The front door was unlocked. Constance sat dead center in the formal living room on an imported velvet sofa. Her face was carved from stone. Marlo was there too, sitting on an armchair, holding Declan, acting for all the world like the lady of the manor. Vance stood by the massive bay windows, unlit cigar in his hand. Seeing me walk in, Vance's first words were, "Where is the baby?" "At my condo, with my mother." "Why didn't you bring her so my mother could see her?" I shifted my gaze to Constance. "If your mother wants to look at her eldest grandson, Declan is sitting right there." Constance slammed her teacup onto the saucer. "Watch your mouth. I don't have the energy to waste on you," I said evenly. "I'm going to the master suite." Marlo hastily stood up, her voice trembling softly. "Sloan, I know you're furious with me. I came today to apologize. Declan and I truly didn't mean to ruin your marriage. It's just, Declan has never had a father. It's so hard on a little boy." Declan hid behind her designer skirt and whimpered loudly. Vance immediately looked at Marlo, his eyes softening with that familiar, sickeningly protective instinct. Once, a scene like this would have suffocated me with grief. Now, it was just pathetic. A woman who wins battles by letting a single tear fall, and a man who forgets his legal wife just had major surgery the second he sees those tears. And I was the idiot who stood between them, carving pieces out of my own soul to patch up their dysfunction. I walked upstairs and opened my walk-in closet. It had been ransacked. The designer dresses I had meticulously dry-cleaned and hung before going into labor were shoved aside, mixed with cheap Zara blazers that clearly belonged to Marlo. I pulled open the velvet-lined drawer of my vanity. The antique jewelry box my mother had gifted me on my wedding day was half empty. I walked back down the sweeping staircase holding the open, pillaged box. Who touched my jewelry? Constance didn't miss a beat. We're a family. What's the big deal if we borrowed a few trinkets? Marlo had to attend a parent-teacher association meeting for Declan at his prep school. She couldn't walk in there looking like a peasant and have people laugh at the Sterlings. Marlo looked down, playing the bashful victim. "Sloan, I just borrowed them. I meant to put them back, but things have been so chaotic." I stared at her. "Then take them off and give them back. Right now." Marlo froze. Vance frowned heavily. "It's just a few shiny rocks, Sloan. Do you have to cause a scene over everything?" I turned to him, my voice carrying the chill of a Chicago winter. "These pieces are my premarital assets, heirlooms from my grandmother. You let your mistress raid your wife's closet so she can play rich mom at a school I pay for, and you're telling me not to cause a scene?" He went quiet. Marlo bit her lip, scurried into the powder room, and emerged a minute later with a handful of pieces. I inspected the box. "Where is the Mikimoto pearl necklace?" Marlo stammered. Declan was playing with it and the string snapped. I took it to a jeweler to get restrung. "Where is the claim ticket?" She didn't answer. I pulled out my phone. "Then I am filing a police report for grand larceny." Constance jumped up. "Don't you dare! This is a family dispute. You're going to drag the police into our private home?" I met her glare. You weren't ashamed when you stole from me. Why are you suddenly scared when I want my property back? Blair stepped forward, letting out a sharp scoff. She dropped a thick stack of printed financial spreadsheets onto the glass coffee table, fanning them out. Declan's prep school, $45,000. Marlowe's rent, $48,000. Constance's medical bills, $120,000. Vance's company, $250,000. House renovations, $180,000. I looked Vance dead in the eye. You said my daughter has no right to claim anything from the Sterling estate. So, tell me. Vance, look around this house and tell me exactly how much of the Sterling estate actually belongs to the Sterlings. A graveyard silence fell over the massive living room. Marlowe looked visibly sick. Constance's hands shook uncontrollably. Vance stared at the spreadsheets as if staring into a massive sinkhole that had just swallowed his inflated pride. He swallowed hard, his voice raspy. Sloane, do you really have to reduce our marriage down to a dollar amount? I nodded slowly. Yes. Because you were the ones who first decided my daughter and I were worthless. I dropped the petition for dissolution of marriage and the asset division demand on top of the spreadsheets. You have 3 days. Sign it, or my lawyers will compel discovery, and we see each other in court. Without waiting for a response, I picked up my jewelry box, signaled my security guard, and walked out the front doors. Behind me, I heard Marlowe break into dramatic, heaving sobs. But Vance didn't chase after me. I knew the panic had finally set in. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a tantrum. I was methodically, surgically excising myself from the Sterling family. 3 days passed. Vance didn't sign the papers. He didn't respond to Blair regarding the asset split. Instead, on the evening of the 3rd day, he sent me a voice note. Come to the house at 7 p.m. for dinner. The extended family will be here. We're going to sit down, talk this through once and for all, and put this behind us. I stared at the message. In the past, the mere mention of the extended family made my chest tight. The Sterlings were masters at weaponizing relatives to bully outsiders into submission. They could turn a simple marital disagreement into an attack on the honor of the family name. Any pushback from me was branded as disrespecting the elders. Blair listened to the audio and scowled. Do not go alone. That's not a dinner invitation. It's an ambush. A kangaroo court. I smiled grimly. All the more reason to go. When it's just us, they gaslight me and say I have postpartum psychosis. When it's a small group, they say I'm just being petty. Tonight, there will be an audience. Let them show their true colors under the spotlight. I didn't take Ainsley. She was far too pure to breathe the toxic, calculating air of that dining room. My mom stayed at the condo. Before I left, she adjusted my scarf, her eyes dark with worry. If it gets too vicious, just walk out. Don't sit there and take it. I nodded, but deep down I knew. This was the decisive battle. It couldn't be avoided. At 7 p.m. sharp, I walked into the Lake Forest estate. The formal dining room was blazing with crystal chandeliers. A catered feast covered the mahogany table, but no one was eating. Vance's Uncle Robert, Aunt Vera, and several older cousins were seated around the table. Constance sat at the head, looking as stern as a Supreme Court justice about to read a death sentence. Marlowe was there too, wearing an elegant cream silk blouse, her hand resting affectionately on Declan's shoulder. If a stranger walked in, they'd assume she was the daughter-in-law, and I was the unwanted interloper disrupting their peace. I pulled out a chair and sat down, skipping the fake pleasantries. What's the agenda? Say it. Constance glared at me with pure disdain. You just had a baby, and your temperament has only gotten more repulsive. We called you here tonight to set things straight. The Sterling family will not allow you to run amok and destroy our reputation. Vance slid a bound legal document across the table toward me. Look at this. It's the most rational compromise for everyone. I looked down. The bold heading read, Family Estate Harmonization and Heir Designation Agreement. Reading it line by line, a dark amusement bubbled up in my chest. They wanted me to legally acknowledge Declan as Vance's eldest son, with priority inheritance rights to the Sterling estate. I, and Ainsley, would be barred from liquidating or dividing the core business assets. In the event of a divorce, I would waive my right to seek restitution for the funds I had injected into their lives. And the absolute kicker, the final clause. Sloane Kensington agrees to a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding any internal family matters to protect the Sterling brand. I casually tossed the document back onto the table. Who drafted this garbage? Constance snapped. We discussed it as a family. Uncle Robert cleared his throat, trying to sound authoritative. Sloane, you're a woman. You're postpartum. Your hormones are all over the place. We understand. But designating a male heir is a serious matter of legacy. Since Declan already calls Vance his father, he needs official legal status. Aunt Vera chimed in. You had a girl. Eventually, she'll marry into someone else's family. If we leave the Sterling assets to a granddaughter, it just ends up in a stranger's pockets anyway. I looked at Vance. He actually agreed with them. He refused to meet my eyes, staring at his water glass. It's a way to minimize collateral damage, Sloane. Don't worry. Even if we go through with the divorce, I will pay child support for Ainsley. Marlo immediately lowered her head, her voice quivering perfectly. Sloane, I swear I don't want to steal anything from you. But Declan is getting older. He needs a legitimate status. Please, I'm begging you, have some pity on the boy. I stared at her. Legitimate status? The status of a bastard son while the legal wife was still bleeding from a C-section? Marlo gasped and turned pale. Vance slammed his palm on the mahogany table. Sloane. I didn't even blink. I unclasped my purse, pulled out my iPhone, and placed it flat on the table. Since the whole family is gathered, let's take a listen, just so we are all on the exact same page. Vance's face drained of color. I hit play. The audio from the hospital recovery room blasted at maximum volume. Vance's voice, crisp and cruel. Marlo and I have a son. Declan. He is the true bloodline. Your child has no right to claim anything in our estate. The dining room went graveyard silent. Uncle Robert stared awkwardly into his teacup. Aunt Vera clamped a hand over her mouth. Constance turned a sickly shade of green. The recording continued to Constance's voice. You had a girl. Eventually, she'll get married and take someone else's name. Declan is the root of the Sterling legacy. The air in the room practically froze. I shut off the screen, picked up their ridiculous heir designation agreement, and ripped it cleanly in half right in front of their faces. Divorce. Restitution of all my funds. Full physical and legal custody of my daughter. If you don't agree, I'll see you in court. Vance jumped out of his chair. You are taking this way too far. I'm taking it too far? Or are you just entirely delusional? Constance hissed through her teeth. Don't think your little bank statements scare us. I looked at her. They aren't just bank statements, Constance. They are 4 years of my life. Suddenly, Marlo threw her arms around Declan, and tears poured from her eyes like a faucet. Sloane. Ainsley is just a tiny baby. Do you really have the heart to permanently deprive her of a father? I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The most heartless thing I can think of is a biological father disowning his child on the day she is born. Something flashed in Marlo's eyes. She lowered her head and muttered, Vance is going to hate you for the rest of his life for this. My head snapped toward her. What exactly do you mean by that? Marlo bit her lip hard, as if she realized she had misspoken. Vance's expression shifted nervously, and Constance hastily interjected. She means nothing. It's just, the boy has a fragile constitution. I stood up slowly, keeping one hand pressed against my aching abdomen. What else do you want from my child? A terrifying silence blanketed the room. It took a long time before Vance finally spoke, his voice strained. Declan needs a stem cell compatibility test. The hospital has Ainsley's umbilical cord blood in the cryogenic vault. It's just a test. We don't even know if it's a match yet. I stared at him, my vision literally going black at the edges. 10 minutes ago, they were trying to force me to sign away my daughter's inheritance. 5 days ago, they called her a worthless female. And now, they wanted to harvest her medical data and genetic material to save the bastard son they treated like a crown prince. I started to laugh. It was a hoarse, ragged, freezing laugh. You people truly have no bottom, Vance scowled. Don't be so dramatic. Declan is a child too. Doesn't Ainsley? He couldn't even finish the sentence. I grabbed my purse and turned toward the foyer. Constance shrieked from the table. Stop. Saving a life is good karma. Ainsley is his little sister. What is so wrong with her helping her brother? I stopped, turned my head, and enunciated clearly, my daughter does not have a brother. I tried to walk away, but Vance blocked the doorway, grabbing my wrist. The sudden movement yanked my surgical staples. A blinding pain ripped through me, and cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Blair, who had been waiting in the car, had apparently seen the commotion through the windows and stormed through the front door. Let her go! Blair shoved Vance backward. She had major abdominal surgery 10 days ago. Touch her again and I'm pressing assault charges. Vance dropped my arm, but his face held no remorse, only frustrated rage. I just want to have a rational conversation. I held my stomach and glared at him. Your version of rational is forcing me and my daughter to be spare parts and stepping stones for Marlo and her kid. No one could think of a retort. I walked out of that house, Marlo's dramatic sobbing echoing behind me. But this time, she didn't seem pathetic to me. She seemed terrifying. A woman who could weaponize tears to steal a husband could easily weaponize her child's illness to carve up my daughter. That night, I didn't go straight home. As soon as I got in the SUV, I looked at Blair. Take me to Northwestern Memorial right now. I need to put a complete, impenetrable legal lock on Ainsley's medical records and biosamples. Blair didn't hesitate. Hit the gas, she told the driver. The city glowed against the damp asphalt after a light drizzle. I sat in the back seat, clutching my folder of documents to my chest, as if it were my child's actual life. The incision throbbed violently, but the physical pain was eclipsed by the terrifying realization that if I was even a step too slow, the Sterlings would find a way to access Ainsley's cord blood. They treated her like trash, but the second she was useful, they cloaked themselves in family ties to plunder her. In the hospital's medical records and biobanking administration office, Blair laid out the legal situation with ruthless precision. The night shift administrator frowned and opened the database. Typically, any release of neonatal biomaterials or records requires the consent of the legal guardian. If you explicitly deny consent, no one can draw samples, view the charts, or initiate a transfer. I looked the administrator dead in the eyes. I want to file a hard copy injunction on the file. Any data, any sample, any record involving my child, including the cryogenic cord blood, can only be accessed with my notarized signature, or my mother's. No verbal authorizations. Nobody claiming to be the father, the grandmother, or a private doctor hired by them. The woman looked at my pale, sweating face, likely guessing the nightmare unfolding behind the scenes. She typed rapidly. Done. I'm placing a red flag lockdown on the digital file, and I need you to sign these hard copy affidavits. My hand shook from pain and adrenaline as I signed. Every stroke of the pen felt like I was swinging a machete, chopping off the greedy hands reaching for my baby. Thank you, I breathed. Exiting the office, I didn't head straight for the elevators. My core was cramping severely, so I leaned against a tiled wall in a quiet corridor to catch my breath. Blair offered to get a wheelchair, but I shook my head. At that exact moment, a familiar figure darted past the junction, leading to the pediatric wing. Beige cashmere. Perfectly tousled hair. A calculated, fragile gait. It was Marlo. Blair and I exchanged a sharp look, and Blair immediately pulled me back behind the corner. Marlo was standing near a billing kiosk, phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was speaking in hushed tones, but the empty hospital corridor amplified her voice perfectly. Stop calling me. I'll send more money right now. You cannot open your mouth about this. Do you understand? I held my breath. Blair froze. Marlo's back was to us. Her shoulders were tense, and her voice possessed none of the pathetic sweetness she used with Vance. It was harsh, grating, and desperate. Declan is sick. I don't have time to deal with your threats. If you come near me again, I will end you. She hung up and immediately opened her banking app on her phone. From our angle, I couldn't see much, but I clearly saw the recipient name she tapped. Garrett Thorne. The transfer went through instantly. As she turned around, she locked eyes with me. All the blood vanished from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Sloane, what are you doing here?" I pushed myself off the wall, standing as straight as my stitches would allow. "I should be asking you that. Who are you wiring extortion money to in the middle of the night?" Terrified they'll talk, Marlo gripped her phone with white knuckles. "A friend. My private life is none of your business." "A friend? Garrett Thorne?" Her pupils dilated in sheer panic. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I had hit the kill switch. "Are you following me?" she hissed. I scoffed. "Do you actually think you're worth my time? I came to legally lock down my daughter's biodata. I didn't expect to run into you trembling in a hallway, paying off some guy to keep his mouth shut." Marlo glanced around. Seeing the corridor was empty, she dropped the helpless victim act completely. She took a step toward me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Sloane, you already have your perfect little baby. Why do you have to back us into a corner? Declan just wants to live. I want my son to live." I stared her down. "You want your son to live? So you targeted my daughter? If it's just a test, why didn't you ask me directly? Why did you bring the entire Sterling cartel to ambush me and force me to sign away my child's rights? Why did you let them stomp my baby into the dirt while simultaneously trying to harvest her to save yours?" Marlo's face paled further, but then she let out a cold, mocking laugh. "You think you've won? Vance has loved me and Declan for years. A couple of bank statements won't erase that. In his heart, I will always be the one that got away." Looking at her, I suddenly realized how utterly pathetic she was. Not because she was a struggling mother, but because her ultimate prize, her grand trophy, was a weak, narcissistic coward of a man. "I never tried to win him from you," I said calmly. Marlo blinked, confused. I continued. "A man who stands by while his family forces his wife, recovering from surgery, to surrender her newborn's rights. If you want him that badly, keep him. I'm just warning you. I am done with Vance. But if you try to step over my daughter to secure your place in that house, I will destroy you." Her eyes went pitch black with hatred. Blair stepped in front of me, shielding me. "Marlo, hospital corridors have security cameras with audio arrays. Everything you just said is recorded. If any unauthorized inquiries are made into Ainsley's medical files, you will be the prime suspect in a federal HIPAA investigation." Marlo pressed her lips into a thin line, spun on her heel, and practically sprinted away. But her posture wasn't defiant. It was the frantic scramble of a rat on a sinking ship. On the ride back, Blair made a quick call to a private investigator she kept on retainer. Run a deep background on a Garrett Thorne. Tie him to Marlo. Check Florida records. By the time I unlocked the door to my condo around midnight, Blair's phone pinged. She read the encrypted email, and her jaw actually dropped. "What is it?" I asked. "Garrett Thorne. Extensive rap sheet. He lived with Marlo in Miami 4 years ago. The timeline overlaps perfectly with when she got pregnant with Declan." I went dead silent. The condo was so quiet I could hear Ainsley's rhythmic breathing from the nursery. Blair looked up from her screen. "Sloane, if I'm reading this right, Declan isn't Vance's kid." I closed my eyes. I wasn't entirely shocked, but a cold chill still ran down my spine. The Sterlings worshipped Declan as their golden heir. They demanded my daughter step aside for him. They tried to harvest her cord blood to save him. And from day one, it had all been a monumental con built on Marlo's tears and Vance's staggering ego. I opened my eyes and looked toward the nursery. "Blair, don't tell Vance yet." She grinned, a predatory legal shark scenting blood. "You want him to figure it out himself." I nodded. "If we hand him the proof, he'll convince himself it's a forged smear campaign out of jealousy. But if he unearths the lie himself, that will truly destroy him." I sat by Ainsley's bassinet until dawn. Watching the Chicago skyline slowly illuminate, I knew this wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was an abyss. And the first person to fall into it was going to be the man who arrogantly claimed my daughter was worthless. Before the sun was fully up, Vance texted me. I read the text while nursing Ainsley. She was so quiet, her eyes half closed, her tiny hand resting against my skin as if afraid I would disappear. I didn't reply immediately. I looked at my daughter, then felt the ache of the surgical scar under my clothes. Flesh heals, but words spoken to destroy a soul linger forever. Apologies on bended knee don't erase the past. They just serve as a reminder to never be a fool again. Blair picked me up at 9:30. Before I left, my mom asked quietly, "Do you think he'll actually sign this time?" I buttoned my trench coat. "I don't know, Mom, but I know he's starting to panic." We arrived at Blair's building exactly on time. Vance was already pacing by the revolving doors. He was alone today, no Constance, no Marlowe, no Declan. He wore a wrinkled gray button-down, stubble shadowed his jaw, and heavy bags hung under his eyes. In just a few days, the arrogant aristocrat from the maternity ward had deteriorated into an exhausted, hollowed-out shell. Seeing me get out of the car, he rushed over. "You've lost so much weight." I pulled my coat tighter. "Let's go upstairs and sign." He stopped, his eyes pleading. "Sloane, do we really have to treat each other like enemies?" I looked at him. "How do you want me to treat the man who abandoned me after surgery to play daddy to his ex's kid?" He swallowed hard. "I said terrible things at the hospital. I'm sorry." "Which things specifically?" He frowned. "You know what I mean. I want to hear you say it." His jaw clenched. He was so used to saying a generic, "I'm sorry," and having me instantly forgive him to keep the peace. But today, I wasn't accepting a blanket apology for a very specific, calculated cruelty. He took a deep, ragged breath. "I shouldn't have said my daughter had no right to the Sterling estate." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "My daughter? First time you've called her that. Too bad it took place on the sidewalk outside a divorce attorney's office." His eyes were bloodshot. "Sloane, I don't want a divorce." I wasn't surprised. He didn't want a divorce because he loved me. He didn't want a divorce because his Amex was declined. His financial ledgers were exposed. His medical proxy was revoked, and his family could no longer bleed my accounts dry. "You really think that low of me?" he asked. "I think exactly what your actions proved." He balled his hands into fists. "Declan has had a brutal life. Marlowe has suffered so much. I can't just abandon them." "I am not asking you to abandon them," I said calmly. "I am just asking you not to drag me and my daughter into your cheap savior complex." He was speechless. Blair, holding her briefcase, watched the exchange with cold detachment. I pulled the settlement folder from her and rested it on a concrete planter near the entrance. "I retain sole physical and legal custody. She keeps my maiden name. You pay statutory child support. The funds your family siphoned from me will be reconciled via a forensic accountant, and the loans will be repaid or clawed back from your equity in the startup." Vance flipped through the pages, his face darkening. "She keeps the name Kensington? That is crossing a line, Sloane. She is a Sterling." I looked at him with utter apathy. "On the day she was born, you disowned her. I simply made it legally binding. It was what you wanted." I was angry. When your family tortures people, it's anger. When I protect my child, it's crossing a line. Do you hear yourself, Vance? He slammed the folder down on the planter. "I'm not signing this." I nodded. "Then we go to trial." I turned to walk into the building. Vance shouted after me, "Are you doing this just to punish me because of Marlowe?" I stopped. The Chicago wind whipped the dry leaves around my boots. I turned back and looked at the man who used to be my entire world. Once, a slight frown on his face would keep me up at night. Now I saw exactly what he was. A fragile, greedy narcissist, using duty as an excuse to maintain a harem. "Vance," I said softly, stepping a fraction closer, "if you really want to play the noble protector, why don't you ask Marlowe some questions?" He scowled. "Like what?" I lowered my voice. "Ask her who she lived with in Miami. Ask her who Garrett Thorne is. Ask her why she wires him thousands of dollars in the middle of the night." His face completely froze. "What the hell are you talking about?" I looked straight into his eyes. "I'm not talking nonsense. I'm just giving you a heads up. Make sure you aren't throwing away your biological daughter to play daddy to a child whose real origins you don't even know." He lunged forward and grabbed my arm, but Blair instantly body-blocked him. "Back off! She just had a C-section." "One more aggressive move and I'm having you arrested on the spot." Vance let go, but panic was wildly dancing in his eyes. "Sloane, you don't get to drag Declan's name through the mud. He's just a little boy. I have no interest in hurting a child, I said. But when adults weaponize that child to strip my baby of her rights, I will not stay quiet. I walked into the building. Looking back through the glass, Vance was standing frozen on the pavement, his phone already in his hand. His face was a mask of rage and horrific doubt. I knew the seed was planted. With his massive ego, he wouldn't let this go. A man might excuse his wife's anger, but he will never tolerate the suspicion that his pride has been made a fool of. When I got back to the condo, Ainsley was asleep in my mom's arms. The moment I sat down, my phone rang. Unknown number. I looked at Blair, who nodded and tapped record on her iPad. I put it on speaker. It was Marlo. But the soft, pathetic whisper was gone. Sloane. What did you say to Vance? I leaned back, wincing slightly as my stitches pulled, but my voice was smooth. Are you afraid he's going to ask the right questions? Silence stretched over the line before Marlo let out a dark, ragged laugh. You think some vague hints will make him doubt me? He loves Declan more than he will ever love your brat. I looked at Ainsley, and the air in the room felt frigid. Then you have nothing to worry about. Wait for him with confidence. Her tone suddenly spiked into a psychotic screech. If you ruin my life, and my son's life, I swear to God I will not let you or your daughter live in peace. Blair gave me a thumbs up. The threat was recorded. I stared at the blinking call timer. Marlo, thank you. You just gave my lawyer the evidence for a restraining order. She hung up. The condo was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I knew that, from this second on, Marlo wouldn't just cry. When a cornered animal's darkest secret is exposed, it either runs or bites. I had to be ready for both. 2 days after Marlo's threatening phone call, chaos erupted in my building's lobby. My mom had just gone down to the ground floor to pick up a grocery delivery when my phone started vibrating violently. It was my mom. I answered, and immediately heard a roar of voices in the background, cutting through the ambient noise of the lobby. It was Constance screaming at the top of her lungs. Everyone, look at this! Look at the injustice! My daughter-in-law had a baby, stole my granddaughter, locked her in this building, and refuses to let the grandmother even look at her. She's trying to destroy the Sterling family. My heart hammered against my ribs. I gently put Ainsley in the snoo and pulled up the building's security camera feed on my iPad, which was linked to our smart home system. Down in the marble lobby, Constance was sitting flat on the floor, wailing. 2 of Vance's aunts stood beside her. Marlo was positioned slightly behind them, her face arranged into a mask of tragic panic. My mother stood a few feet away, holding a Whole Foods paper bag, looking utterly surrounded. A crowd of residents had stopped to watch. A few even had their phones out, recording. Marlo stepped forward, trying to help Constance up. Her voice trembled loudly. Please, Constance, don't do this. Sloane just gave birth. If she sees this, it will hurt her recovery. It sounded like a plea for peace, but it was perfectly calculated to pour gasoline on the fire. The onlookers immediately shot judgmental glares at my mother. I heard a woman mutter, "What kind of family drama is this? Keeping a baby from her grandmother is sick." I gripped my phone. Blair, who had been sitting at my dining table reviewing depositions, stood up sharply. Do not go down there. They are staging a provocation. They want you to come down, lose your temper, and look like the hysterical, abusive wife on camera. I took a deep breath. My lower abdomen throbbed. Call building security and the CPD. Tell management. I need the lobby feeds backed up immediately. Blair nodded and started making calls. I hit screen record on my iPad. Down in the lobby, Constance was still putting on a masterclass in theatrics. We paid for a massive wedding. We treated her like royalty. And now she wants to strip my granddaughter of our family name. She wants to end our bloodline. My mother's voice cut through the noise, frigid and commanding. It was your son who explicitly stated that the child had no right to anything in your family. Now you suddenly remember she's your granddaughter? Constance choked on her fake sobs for a second, then slapped her own thighs dramatically. A man speaks out of anger. A good wife knows how to forgive. Your daughter just gave birth and immediately hired attack dog lawyers to humiliate her husband's family. Suddenly, Marlo staggered. She clutched her chest, stumbled forward, and fell directly at my mother's feet. It happened so fast, and so fluidly, that from the angle of the crowd, it looked exactly as if my mother had violently shoved her. The grocery bag in my mom's hand dropped, spilling organic apples across the marble floor. The crowd gasped. "Oh my God, did she just push her? She's so fragile. How could you do that?" Watching the screen, my blood ran cold. Marlo wasn't just crying anymore. She was weaponizing her own body to orchestrate a criminal assault frame-up. I grabbed my coat. Blair tried to grab my arm. "Wait 2 minutes. Management is pulling the raw feeds. I can't let my mom stand there alone." When I stepped off the elevator into the lobby, 2 Chicago police officers were walking through the revolving doors, flanked by the building's head of security. The property manager was holding an iPad. "Officers, right here." We pulled the high-def overhead angle. On the security footage, it was crystal clear. My mother was standing over 3 feet away from Marlo, both hands firmly holding her grocery bag. Marlo took a step forward, deliberately buckled her own knees, and threw herself onto the floor. The residents who had just been heckling my mother suddenly shut their mouths. A few looked deeply embarrassed. Marlo sat on the floor, pale as a sheet. She was still forcing tears, but this time, nobody rushed to help her up. I walked over. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence. "Marlo, you just implied my mother assaulted you. The police are here. And the 4K cameras caught everything. Would you like to repeat your claim to the officers and catch a charge for filing a false police report?" She bit her lip so hard it almost bled and looked frantically at Constance. Constance immediately pivoted. "She's postpartum. Her hormones are crazy. She probably just lost her balance." I unlocked my phone and held it up, playing the audio file from the hospital at max volume. Vance's voice echoed across the quiet lobby. "Your child has no right to claim anything in our estate." Then Constance's voice. "You had a girl. Eventually, she'll get married. Declan is the root of the Sterling legacy." The lobby was dead silent. The judgmental stares that had been aimed at my mother were now laser-focused on Constance. I turned to the CPD officers. "You heard the audio. They disowned my newborn daughter on the day of her birth. Since then, they have repeatedly shown up at my home to harass me, and today, they staged a fake assault to extort access to my child. I want to file formal charges for harassment, criminal trespass, and filing a false police report." Constance's face turned bright red. "You're going to have your own mother-in-law arrested? You stopped being my mother-in-law the second you called my baby worthless." Marlo scrambled to her feet, her voice raspy. "Sloan, do you have no shame? Pushing things to this extreme? Declan is sick. Do you want us to die on the street?" I stared her down. "If your child is sick, take him to a hospital. Stop staging off-Broadway plays in my lobby." Right at that moment, Vance sprinted through the lobby doors, out of breath. He took in the scene: the cops, the cameras, his mother, Marlo, and me. His eyes were frantic and exhausted. "Sloan, do you have to blow everything completely out of proportion?" I looked at him for a long time. "I'm not blowing anything out of proportion. You just still operate under the delusion that I'm easy to bully." Blair stepped forward, lifting her iPad. Displayed on the screen was a blown-up screenshot of the Venmo wire transfer receipt connecting Marlo to Garrett Thorne. "Mr. Sterling, before you continue defending your mistress, I highly recommend you find out exactly who this man is." Vance's face contorted. Marlo let out a strangled gasp and lunged for the iPad, but Blair effortlessly sidestepped her. "Vance, she's lying!" Marlo screamed, tears streaming down her face. "She fabricated that. She just wants to destroy us." Vance looked at Marlo. For the very first time, the absolute, blind devotion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dark, creeping horror. "Who is Garrett Thorne?" Marlo froze completely. It was just a second of hesitation, but it was the sledgehammer that shattered the illusion. I turned around and walked toward the elevators. Before the doors closed, I heard Vance roar, "I asked you a question! Who the hell is Garrett Thorne?" I didn't look back. The stainless steel doors slid shut, cutting off Marlo's sobbing, Constance's frantic backpedaling, and Vance's heavy, ragged breathing. The fire of suspicion had finally been ignited inside the Sterling house, and it was going to burn them to the ground. Back in the condo, I took Ainsley into my arms. She opened her eyes, looking at me with absolute clarity. I held her tight and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Mommy will never let you be the casualty of their stupidity." That evening, my phone lit up constantly. Vance calling. Texting. Calling again. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen island, ignoring the buzzing, as if it were a dying insect. My mom paced the living room, rocking Ainsley, shooting me worried glances. Blair sat at the table with her laptop, methodically organizing the digital files. Financial audits, harassment reports, medical injunctions. I listened to the soft smacking sounds Ainsley made in her sleep and realized that no matter how loud the world outside got, it could never break me again. Blair glanced at my phone. "Not going to answer?" I shook my head. He doesn't want to apologize. He wants me to validate his reality. Just then, a text flashed on my lock screen from Vance. "Who is Garrett Thorne? Tell me everything you know." I stared at the words, then typed back, "Ask the man receiving the money." He called immediately. I declined it. A minute later, another text. "Sloan, don't use Declan to get revenge on me." I let out a bitter laugh. Even now, his ego convinced him I was just a jealous, vindictive ex. It's amazing how narcissists operate. When they destroy you, it's unavoidable. When the truth corners them, you're the cruel one. Blair slid a piece of paper across the table. "Here's the address of a mechanic shop in Miami where Garrett Thorne currently works." The P.I. confirmed it. Thorne lived with Marlo in Miami for almost a year. That overlaps perfectly with Declan's conception. She took the kid, fled to Chicago, and magically bumped into Vance. I touched the paper, my fingertips cold. "Is there a photo?" Blair turned her laptop screen. The photo showed a man in his 30s, deeply tanned, gaunt, leaning against a garage bay. He wasn't particularly distinct, but when I looked closely at the shape of his eyes and the bridge of his nose, my stomach dropped. He had features strikingly similar to Declan's. Not a carbon copy, but enough to make a paranoid man lose his mind. "Should we send the photo to Vance?" I asked. Blair shook her head. "No. You gave him the name. A man with Vance's ego will tear the earth apart to find the truth himself. If we hand it to him, he'll deflect and blame us. If he digs it up himself, the psychological damage is permanent." As expected, closer to midnight, Vance stopped calling, but Marlo called. I put it on speaker. Blair immediately activated her recording software. Marlo's voice shook, but it wasn't the breathy, delicate tremor she used in public. It was the feral panic of an animal caught in a bear trap. "Sloan, how much money do you want?" I looked at Blair, who raised an eyebrow. "What money?" I asked flatly. "Drop the act. You know about Garrett, don't you? How much to keep your mouth shut?" I sat up straight, ignoring the dull throb in my abdomen. "Then what do you want? Do you want Vance to throw us out? Do you want Declan to die? Stop hiding behind a sick child." I haven't laid a finger on Declan, but the second you tried to use my newborn daughter as spare parts to save a kid whose real father you're terrified to name, you crossed a line I will not forgive. Dead silence on the line. Then, Marlo started to sob, but it was dry, angry, weeping. "I had no choice. If I didn't say Declan was Vance's, how were we supposed to survive? You had a fancy condo, a supportive mother, an inheritance. What did I have?" I closed my eyes. She was still the same, always twisting her greed into a tragic victim narrative. "So because you had nothing, you had the right to hijack my husband and try to mutilate my family? Vance chose you. He loved you before our wedding. If it wasn't for me, you say you would have been his wife." I looked at Ainsley's bassinet. "So why didn't you just tell him the truth about Declan from the start?" Marlo choked. Suddenly, there was a violent scuffling sound over the phone, like a device being ripped from someone's hand. In the next second, Vance's voice blasted through the speaker. It was guttural, raw, and terrifying. "What truth?" I froze. Blair's head snapped up. Dead silence on the other end. Vance must have been standing right next to her, or listening in on another device. A few seconds later, Marlo's voice shrieked, hysterical and trembling. "Vance, listen to me. Vance enunciated every single word like a hammer striking an anvil. Is Declan my son? Don't listen to her. She hates me. She's lying. I'm asking you, is Declan my son? Marlowe's sobs dissolved into a full-blown, hyperventilating breakdown. Then came the sound of glass shattering against a wall. I said nothing. I let my absolute silence be the cruelest answer possible. I could hear Vance gasping for air on the line, breathing heavily as if someone had a boot on his throat. Sloane, when did you know? It doesn't matter when, I replied smoothly. What matters is that for a lie, you threw your biological daughter in the trash on the day she was born. He fell silent. It took a long time before he spoke again, his voice sounding like grinding sandpaper. I'm getting a DNA test. The call disconnected. I sat still in the warm, dim glow of the kitchen pendants. Outside, a heavy Chicago rain began to fall, the drops pelting the glass with violent rhythm. My mom came out holding Ainsley and asked softly, "Did something happen, honey?" I looked at my baby. She had done absolutely nothing wrong since the second she entered this world, yet she was almost sacrificed on the altar of someone else's greed and stupidity. A storm is breaking, Mom, I said. 3 days later, Vance showed up at my building. He didn't cause a scene. He didn't bring his mother. He just stood alone in the pouring rain, his expensive coat soaked through, gripping a crumpled white envelope. The doorman called up, asking if I wanted him removed. I looked at the security feed. Vance looked like a walking corpse. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept since that phone call. Blair looked over my shoulder. Looks like the paternity results came in. I paused, then told the doorman, "Let him into the resident lounge on the second floor. Do not let him up to my unit." 10 minutes later, I walked into the private lounge. Vance was sitting on a modern leather sofa, clutching the envelope with both hands. When he looked up, one glance was all it took. Everything was exactly as I had predicted. He placed the lab results on the glass coffee table. His voice cracked. "Declan isn't mine." I looked at the paper, then at the man. I felt no joy, no vindication, only an infinite, icy void. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders violently shaking. Sloane, I was so wrong. I stared at him for a long time. You weren't wrong because you were conned, Vance. You were wrong because, long before you knew about the lie, you chose to inflict unimaginable cruelty on me and our daughter. He looked up, tears cutting through the stubble on his face. Can I just see Ainsley? Just once? I stood up. No. Sloane. I met his gaze dead on. On the day she was born, you had your chance. You walked away. You disowned her. Vance sat paralyzed. He looked at me with wild red eyes, unable to comprehend how a single word no could be delivered with such absolute, lethal finality. In the past, if he softened his tone, I caved. If he looked stressed, I blamed myself. But this wasn't a fight over loading the dishwasher. He had literally thrown us to the wolves to chase a phantom. Sloane, I know I don't deserve it, but I am her father. I gestured to the DNA results on the table. The lines of text confirming 0 biological probability of paternity between him and Marlowe's child were as cold as a judge's gavel. At what exact moment did you remember you were her father? Was it the exact second you realized that boy wasn't yours? He turned gray. That's not true. Then, what is the truth? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I knew he wanted to explain. He wanted to say he was manipulated, that he felt guilty about Marlowe's past, that Declan was sick and he was desperate, but no excuse could paint over the image of him standing at the foot of my hospital bed, staring coldly at a newborn, and declaring she meant nothing. I grabbed my purse. From today on, you communicate exclusively through Blair. About the divorce, the assets, and the child. He shot up from the sofa. Sloane, I can fix this. I kicked Marlowe out. I'll make things right for you and Ainsley. Just give me one more chance. I looked at him, feeling deeply exhausted. Vance, justice isn't you coming back to Ainsley because you lost Declan. Justice would have been you holding her on the day she was born before you thought of anyone else. It was like I had hit him with a baseball bat. He stumbled back. I didn't look at him again. I walked out of the lounge. Blair followed right behind me. As the elevator doors closed, I could still hear Vance calling my name, hoarse and desperate, but my heart didn't flutter. It didn't even skip a beat. That night, World War III broke out in the Sterling estate. Vance called Constance, and he was screaming so loudly that even through the thick walls of my condo, I could imagine his total mental collapse. Within an hour, Constance's name flashed on my phone. I didn't answer. She started rapid-firing text messages. Sloane. I was so wrong. Ainsley is the true blood of the Sterling family. Please don't be angry anymore. Bring the baby over. Let Grandma see her, just for a second. I read them and laughed. This was the same woman who, 5 days ago, said, "Girls just marry away. She's nothing compared to Declan." Now that Declan was a stranger's kid, Ainsley was suddenly the holy grail. Blair read the texts over my shoulder and said icily, "Screenshot and save them." It perfectly establishes their pattern of conditional, erratic behavior based on the DNA test. Great for the custody hearing. A bit later, Marlo called. I answered and immediately hit record. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was jagged, like broken glass. "Are you happy now?" "You destroyed everything. Vance beat me right in front of Declan. His mother threw us out into the street. Are you satisfied?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "Your lies did." She let out a hysterical, venomous laugh. "You think you won? So what if Vance knows the truth? Declan called him daddy for 5 years. Your brat has been alive for a week. You think emotions can be audited like a bank account?" I looked at Ainsley sleeping. "You're right. Emotions can't be audited, but the law can." "Silence on the line," I continued. "You siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars of my marital assets under the guise of tuition, rent, and medical bills for a child you falsely claimed was my husband's. My forensic accountant is compiling the fraud charges as we speak." Marlo hissed through her teeth. "Sloane, do not push me into a corner. You already said that once. Before you threaten me again, remember I am recording this call." She hung up. I put the phone down, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. I didn't want to wage war with a desperate, cornered woman, but I refused to let her use my child as collateral damage in her imploding life. The next morning, Blair officially filed the divorce petition in Cook County Family Court. Alongside demands for sole custody and asset division, she filed for a protective order against the Sterlings, demanded child support based on Vance's actual corporate valuation, and initiated a separate civil suit for fraud and unjust enrichment regarding the funds funneled to Marlo. When Blair read the filings out loud to me, I knew the road ahead was going to be brutal. But for the first time, it was a road I was paving myself. That afternoon, Vance showed up at my building again. The doorman denied him entry. He stood outside the glass doors holding massive shopping bags, premium organic formula, expensive diapers, and racks of designer pink baby clothes. The doorman called up. I checked the camera feed. Vance was staring up at the floors of the high-rise, looking utterly hollowed out, as if his soul had been extracted. My mom stood next to me. "Should we at least take the supplies?" "No," I said. She hesitated. "Aren't you worried that when Ainsley grows up, she'll resent you for keeping her father away?" I looked at my daughter in the bassinet. She was sleeping, her tiny hand resting near her cheek. She looked so peaceful, entirely unaware she had ever been rejected. When she is old enough to understand, she can decide for herself. Right now, my only job is to protect her from people who only decided to love her when they ran out of other options. That evening, Vance sent me a massive text. He said he had formally evicted Marlo. He said his mother was in shock and refusing to eat. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making it up to us. He ended with, "I truly realize what a monster I was." I sent back a single sentence. "Realizing you were wrong doesn't entitle you to forgiveness." Then I turned on Do Not Disturb. On the balcony, the Chicago wind rustled the elm trees, sounding like a heavy, collective sigh. I held Ainsley tight against my chest. The war was entering a new phase. Having lost their false heir, the Sterlings were going to pivot all their manic obsession onto Ainsley. And this time, they wouldn't just use tears and apologies. 3 days after the court accepted the filings, I received Vance's official legal response. Blair read it first. her face turning stormy. I sat by the bassinet, patting Ainsley's back, skimming the legal jargon. The Sterlings were fighting for joint physical custody. Their argument? Sloane Sterling is suffering from severe postpartum depression and instability. She exhibited extreme aggression, unlawfully removed the infant from the marital home, and maliciously barred the father and grandmother from access. She habitually records private conversations, weaponizes police presence, and attempts to defame the family. They argued Vance had a massive income, real estate, and a mother ready to provide full-time childcare, whereas I was a fragile postpartum woman dependent on my mother in a cramped condo. I read it and started laughing. I laughed so hard my incision ached fiercely, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the absolute 0-degree ice in my veins. Blair slammed the folder shut. They don't want to make amends. They want to steal Ainsley. I looked at my baby. She had filled out in the last 2 weeks, her cheeks pink and chubby. An infant who didn't even know the concept of hate was already being treated as a trophy to salvage a family's bruised ego. Blair, do they have a chance? Blair looked me dead in the eye. If it were just these papers? No. But they are going to try to paint you as clinically insane. From this second forward, you must be flawless. No private meetings with Vance. No phone arguments. Do not give them a single second of audio or video they can deceptively edit. I nodded. That very afternoon, I booked a postpartum psychological evaluation at Rush University Medical Center. Not because I thought I was crazy, but because I needed a board-certified psychiatrist to officially document my sanity and fitness as a mother. When the doctor asked if I felt hopeless or had thoughts of self-harm, I looked through the glass at my mother holding Ainsley in the waiting room. I said calmly, I was subjected to immense emotional abuse, but I am not hopeless. I want to build a beautiful life and raise my daughter. The doctor smiled kindly and signed the evaluation. Walking out with the certified clean bill of mental health, my mom squeezed my hand. You're doing amazing, sweetie. I smiled, though my eyes burned with unshed tears. 2 days later was the court-mandated mediation session. I went with Blair. Vance arrived with his high-priced litigator and Constance. Seeing me, Constance rushed over, her eyes red, putting on a sickeningly sweet performance. Sloane, Mom knows she was wrong, but Ainsley is Sterling blood. You can't be so selfish and keep her from her family. I looked at her blankly and didn't say a word. Vance stood behind her, looking haggard, but there was a new, stubborn desperation in his eyes. He wasn't aggressive anymore, but this cloying softness put me inside the mediation room. The mediator asked if a settlement was possible. Vance looked at me, his voice gravelly. I don't want to fight. I just want my daughter to have her father and grandmother. Sloane, just let her spend a few days a week at the Lake Forest house, and I won't contest the rest. I raised an eyebrow. And who is going to care for her? Your mother? Constance eagerly leaned in. I'm her grandmother. What's wrong with me taking care of my own flesh and blood? I didn't argue. I simply slid a stack of exhibits across the table to the mediator. The transcripts of the hospital audio, the CPD police report from the lobby incident, the HOA security footage of Marlowe faking a fall, the legal injunction from Northwestern Memorial proving the Sterlings tried to access my baby's cord blood for a third party, the financial audits, the psychiatric clearance. It was a fortress of evidence. I looked at Vance. On the day she was born, you said she had no right to the estate. Your mother said girls just marry away. Then you tried to harvest her medical data to save Declan. And now, only because Declan turned out to be a fraud, you suddenly remember Ainsley is Sterling blood. You call that family love? Vance lowered his head, unable to speak. Constance sputtered. We didn't understand the situation back then. Everyone makes mistakes. I snapped my gaze to her. Some people make mistakes and apologize. You made a mistake. And then brought a mob to my house to try and force me to sign away my baby's rights to a stranger's kid. Which category do you fall into? Constance went pale. The mediator frowned deeply while reviewing the stack of evidence. Vance's lawyer tried to pivot. My client admits to verbal missteps under extreme stress, but that does not sever paternal rights. Complete alienation from the father will damage the child's psychology. Blair went for the jugular. Nobody is denying statutory supervised visitation, but custody is based on the best interest of the child. A family that verbally abandoned an infant, emotionally terrorized a postpartum mother, filed false police reports, and attempted unauthorized access to neonatal biomaterials to serve a third-party interest cannot provide a safe environment. The tension in the room was suffocating. Vance looked at me, his voice a pathetic whisper. Sloan, I just want to fix this. I looked at him, realizing the raw agony in my chest was finally gone. Only a bone-deep exhaustion remained. If you want to fix this, start by not treating Ainsley like a consolation prize just because you lost Declan. Vance flinched violently. Constance started to cry, but this time, nobody in the room bought the act. Mediation failed. As we walked into the courthouse corridor, Vance chased after me. I will drop the demand for physical custody if you just guarantee me regular, unsupervised visits. I kept walking. All communication goes through Blair. Supervised visitation at a court-approved center only. She doesn't set foot in Lake Forest. He closed his eyes, swallowing the massive humiliation. Do you really distrust me that much? I stopped and looked at him. It's not that I distrust you. It's that I trusted you for way too long. I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Vance leaning against the marble wall, Constance weeping beside him. I didn't look away. I wanted to burn this image into my brain, so that if I ever felt a moment of pity, I would remember. They only stopped destroying me because the law forced them to. That evening, while I was putting Ainsley to sleep, Blair called. Her voice was uncharacteristically grim. Sloan. Marlo vanished from her apartment. Garrett Thorne is hunting for her too. I think this is about to get a lot uglier than a standard divorce. I looked at the baby monitor. I felt hot and cold at the same time. Let them destroy each other. I just need to keep Ainsley safe. But I never expected that the very next morning, the person standing outside my condo door wouldn't be Marlo, or Garrett, or Vance. But little Declan, I had just changed Ainsley's diaper when the doorbell rang. Mom was in the kitchen, warming up oatmeal, and Blair was on her way over to prep for depositions. I checked the intercom screen and froze. It wasn't Vance or Constance. It was Declan. The 5-year-old was wearing a dirty blue puffer jacket, his hair matted with sweat. He was clutching a small Paw Patrol backpack in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper in the other. He stood plastered against my door, eyes red and puffy, lips trembling. He was entirely alone. Mom came out, saw the screen, and gasped. Why is that child here alone? I pulled Ainsley tight to my chest. Maternal instinct made my heart ache for the terrified little boy, but the trauma of the last few weeks screamed at me not to open that door blindly. I instantly called the front desk. Check the lobby cameras. How did a 5-year-old get up to my floor? Who brought him? The doorman sounded frantic. Let me check, Miss Kensington. One moment. Outside, Declan knocked timidly. His voice was a fragile squeak. Auntie Sloan? Mommy left. She told me to come to you. I closed my eyes. Marlo had actually vanished, and she dumped her kid on my doorstep. Even if he wasn't Vance's, even if his mother had used him as a weapon, he was still just a child entirely innocent of the grotesque sins of the adults around him. Mom looked at me, terrified. What do we do? I put Ainsley safely in her snoo, turned on the living room security camera, and said, Mom, call Blair. I'll open the door, but he stays in the entryway. We have to document everything. I opened the door, leaving the heavy chain lock engaged. Declan looked up at me. He shoved the crumpled paper through the crack. Mommy said to give this to you. I took the paper. Marlo's handwriting was erratic, clearly written in sheer panic. Sloan, I know you despise me, but Declan is innocent. Garrett Thorne is looking for me, and he wants money I don't have. I have nowhere to go. Please watch Declan for a few days. Do not give him to the Sterlings. Vance will never forgive me. I will come back. Reading it, my blood ran ice cold. What a spectacular, pathological narcissist. Driven to the absolute edge, she didn't call the police. She didn't call child services. She didn't call her family. She abandoned her child at the door of the woman she had tried to ruin, betting on the fact that I wasn't a sociopath who would leave a kid to freeze in a hallway. Declan sobbed, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Auntie. Mommy said if I was good, she'd come back. But I've been waiting so long, and I'm so hungry. My throat tightened. I unchained the door. Come inside. Sit on that bench in the hallway. Do not run around. I am going to call some adults to come help you. He nodded frantically and walked in on shaking legs. My mom handed him a cup of warm water and a brioche roll. The boy ate ravenously, but his eyes darted around the room, eventually landing on Ainsley's bassinet. I immediately stepped in front of it, blocking his view. Not because I hated him, but because I couldn't erase the memory of his existence being used to justify erasing my daughter. Blair arrived 15 minutes later with a CPD officer. She read the note, her face turning to stone. Child abandonment. Call Vance immediately. We cannot legally keep this kid here. I nodded. And call Child Protective Services. Hearing Vance's name, Declan visibly flinched. The half-eaten roll shook in his hand. I don't want to go to Grandma's house. Grandma yelled at me and called me a fake. And Daddy. Daddy looked at me so scary. Blair and I exchanged a heavy look. Sometimes a child's raw honesty is more brutal than a courtroom confession. The Sterlings had worshipped the ground this boy walked on, but the second he wasn't their blood, they threw him away like garbage. It made me sick to my stomach. My daughter wasn't the only prop in their sick play. Declan was disposable too. Vance arrived shortly after the police. Seeing Declan sitting in my entryway, Vance froze. The conflict on his face was agonizing. Declan shrank back against my mother's legs. Daddy, I'm sorry I lied to you. I didn't mean to be fake. Hearing that, Daddy, Vance turned white. He took a half step forward, then stopped. A war was raging inside him between 5 years of genuine fatherly affection and the crushing humiliation of being conned. But I didn't care about his pain. I only cared that his hesitation was traumatizing the boy further. Vance, I said coldly, the child is terrified. If you can't control yourself, get out. Vance looked at me with bloodshot eyes. I wasn't going to hurt him. Blair intervened. The minor was abandoned on my client's property. CPD and CPS are here. You have no legal right to remove the child without formal police processing. Vance dropped his head, his hands trembling. He looked at Declan for a long time before asking, his voice cracking, Declan! Where is your mother? The boy shook his head and wailed. I don't know. She said she was going to get medicine and she didn't come back. Suddenly, Vance's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his face hardened. He answered it on speaker. A rough, unfamiliar voice barked through the phone. Vance Sterling? You want to know where Marlo is? Have the cash ready. She owes me a hell of a lot of money. The room went dead silent. Declan screamed in terror. I grabbed Ainsley from the bassinet and retreated toward my mother. Vance gripped his phone, his voice vibrating with pure rage. Are you Garrett Thorne? The man on the other end laughed a nasty, scraping sound. Ask that bitch. She played you for years. Now it's your turn to pay her tab. The line went dead. Vance stood frozen in my living room. And I realized Marlo's play wasn't over. It had mutated into something dark, violent, and dangerous. I looked right at Vance. You heard him. If you let a single shred of Marlo's psychotic drama come anywhere near my daughter, I won't just divorce you. I will ruin you. He looked up at me. His lips parted, but he couldn't speak. For the first time, he wasn't choosing between me and Marlo. His own catastrophic choices had boxed him into a corner with no exit. The police instructed Vance to provide the phone number that just called. They also had to take Declan to the precinct to await a CPS social worker. Realizing he had to leave my condo with the police, Declan panicked, grabbing the hem of my mother's cardigan. His red eyes pleaded with me. I didn't want anything to do with Marlo's mess. But seeing this trembling child, my heart broke. Children don't choose their parents. They don't choose the lies adults force them to carry. I knelt down to his eye level and said very gently, Declan, you are going to go with the police officer. Auntie Blair is going to follow you to make sure nobody yells at you. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? Declan hiccuped. Auntie, do you hate me? I paused. This was the child the Sterlings used to trample my daughter, but he was just a pawn. I don't hate you, Declan. But I have to protect my baby. Do you understand? He gave a tiny nod, tears dripping onto his small hands. Vance stood nearby, pale as a ghost. I think it was the first time he truly understood that his noble responsibility had turned two innocent children into collateral damage. When the police led Declan to the elevator, Vance turned to me. Sloane, let me stay for 5 minutes. Just to talk. I backed into the nursery, holding Ainsley. No. Go deal with Marlowe's extortionist. Did you really have no idea she owed Garrett Thorne money? Did you really not know she'd abandon her son here? I glared at him with absolute ice. There's a lot you didn't know. But every time you were ignorant, my daughter and I paid the price. He stopped breathing. My mom stepped between us, her eyes fierce. Vance, my daughter needs to rest. Get out. Vance lowered his head. Before stepping into the hallway, he whispered, I swear I won't let any of this touch Ainsley. I didn't reply. His promises were like wet tissue paper. The second you applied pressure, they disintegrated. That afternoon, Blair called from the precinct. Declan had been temporarily placed in emergency foster care, while CPS looked for a viable guardian. Vance had actually offered to take temporary placement, but because there was no biological relation and the case involved extortion and fraud, the police required an exhaustive background check. Constance had showed up at the precinct, too. When she saw Declan, she turned her face away and muttered, He's not our blood. Don't make me take him. Blair went quiet after telling me that. Sloane. When I heard her say that, it made my stomach turn. I looked at Ainsley sleeping. The Sterlings never loved children. They only loved their own vanity and bloodline. Later that evening, Vance sent me a massive text. He said Marlowe had cleared out of her apartment. He said Garrett Thorne was her ex-con boyfriend, and they had massive joint debts in Florida. He said he was a complete idiot for believing the sob stories she fed him to manipulate his guilt. He ended with, I am not asking you to forgive me right now. I am only asking you not to block me from atoning for what I did to Ainsley. I read it and shut my screen off. Atoning. It sounds so noble, but it can't be bought with a few packs of diapers and a pathetic apology. A real father doesn't only claim his daughter when his fake son is repossessed. I was about to put my phone on the charger when an unknown number called. I looked at Blair, who immediately hit record on her laptop. I put it on speaker. It was Marlowe. Her voice was raspy, totally exhausted. Sloane, where is Declan? He's in a safe place, I said. Far away from you. She broke into sobs. Give him back! I have nothing left. Then why did you abandon him at my door? I had no choice. Garrett showed up, said if I didn't pay him, he was taking Declan. I was terrified. So you dumped him on the woman you tried to destroy and ran like a coward. I cut her off. Only heavy sobbing came through the speaker. After a minute, her voice turned eerily calm. You know why I dug my claws into Vance? Garrett used to beat me. He took every dime I had. I fled to Chicago with Declan, and Vance was the only one who believed me. If I hadn't told him Declan was his, we would have starved on the street. You had a luxury condo, a rich family. What did I have? I listened to her, feeling absolutely zero pity. Suffering doesn't give you a blank check to destroy someone else's life. Marlowe, you could have gone to a domestic violence shelter. You could have gone to the police. Instead, you chose to seduce a married man. You chose to weaponize your kid against my newborn. You made those choices. She went dead silent. Then, she let out a low, chilling laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. You sound so righteous because you've never hit rock bottom. If I'm going down, I promise you, you aren't going to live happily ever after. Blair signaled me to keep her talking, but Marlowe hung up. The condo was dead silent. My mom walked out with Ainsley, her face pale. What is she going to do? I stared at the black screen of my phone. A cornered animal is dangerous. But a cornered animal whose final mask has been ripped off is capable of anything. I turned to Blair. Call the CPD. Send them that recording. Blair nodded and dialed. I walked through the condo, deadbolting the balcony doors, checking the security cameras, and holding Ainsley so tight my arms ached. In the hallway outside, The motion sensor lights flickered and went dark. I looked through the peephole, nothing but empty space. But that silence terrified me more than screaming. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., the building's fire alarm suddenly shrieked. The piercing siren ripped through the dark. It was so overwhelmingly loud that Ainsley woke up screaming in terror. Adrenaline flooded my system. I bolted upright, my C-section scar pulling as if someone had yanked a fishing line threaded through my skin. But pure maternal terror hijacked my brain before the pain could register. My mom ran out of the guest room, white as a sheet. "Sloan, what is it?" I grabbed Ainsley, wrapping her tightly in a thick wool blanket. "Mom, grab your phone, grab my purse. We're leaving." In the hallway, I could hear doors slamming, neighbors shouting, the automated PA system ordering an evacuation. I checked the smart camera feed above my door. I saw a thin wisp of smoke creeping down the hallway from the direction of the emergency stairwell. It wasn't a massive fire, but it was enough to make my blood freeze. This high-rise never had false alarms, and Marlowe had just threatened me hours ago. I didn't believe in coincidences. Mom practically carried me out the door, shielding Ainsley, keeping my head low. I merged with the panicked residents crowding into the stairwell. Every step downward sent a blinding stab of pain through my abdomen. Cold sweat drenched my back, but I didn't dare stop. Ainsley had stopped crying. I could feel her hot little breaths against my collarbone. My only thought was, get my baby out. When we finally burst into the ground floor lobby, it was packed with security and evacuated residents. By the rear service exit, there was the sharp smell of burning plastic. Building staff were hitting the trash chute room with fire extinguishers. The fire was small, a contained trash fire, but the panic was absolute. Blair called me. "Where are you?" "Lobby. We're safe. Stay right there. I'm 3 minutes away." "CPD is en route." I hung up. Just as I lowered my phone, I saw a silhouette dart past the glass doors of the rear loading dock. A frail figure. Messy hair. A beige raincoat soaked from the drizzle. I only saw her for a fraction of a second, but I knew instantly. Marlowe. She glanced over her shoulder for exactly 1 second. Our eyes met through the chaotic crowd. No fake tears, no pathetic whining, just frantic, rabid hatred. Then she bolted into the alley. I screamed, "Marlowe!" At that exact moment, Vance shoved his way through the front revolving doors. Security must have called him as the emergency contact on file. Hearing me scream, he whipped around, following my line of sight to the service doors. He didn't need an explanation. He sprinted out the doors into the rain after her. I stood in the middle of the lobby, clutching Ainsley. My legs finally gave out. My mom caught me, easing me onto a lobby bench. "Don't move, sweetheart. You're bleeding." I looked down. The exertion had opened a corner of my incision, but I didn't care. I watched the service doors swing shut and listened to the rain outside. The police arrived 15 minutes later. The HOA manager pulled up the raw security footage. At 1:45 a.m., Marlowe had slipped through an unlocked delivery door wearing a hood, carrying a black plastic bag. She stood in the hallway of my floor for several minutes, but seemingly spotted the ring cameras and lost her nerve. Instead, she went to the stairwell, dumped an accelerant down the trash chute, and lit it. A neighbor standing next to me shivered. "Thank God the sprinklers hit it fast." I said nothing. I just hugged Ainsley tighter. If the alarm had failed, if the smoke had been thicker, if my mother had panicked, if my newborn had inhaled carbon monoxide. I couldn't even finish the thought. There is a type of cruelty that doesn't need to kill you. It just needs to make you live in sheer terror for the rest of your life. Blair ran into the lobby, took one look at me, stripped off her blazer, and wrapped it around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" "You're ghostly. Do we have enough on camera?" I asked, my teeth chattering. "More than enough. Plus the recorded threat. She's going to prison." Vance walked back into the lobby near dawn. He was soaked to the bone, his hands scraped and bleeding. He didn't catch Marlowe, but he got the license plate of the taxi she jumped into and gave it to the police. When he walked over to me, there was no trace of the arrogant tech bro I married. There was no trace of the tragic, conflicted hero. He just looked like a man who had finally comprehended the catastrophic price of his own delusion. "Sloan, I am so sorry." I looked at him. I was so exhausted I didn't even have the energy to be angry. Vance, your apologies aren't going to turn off the fire alarms. They aren't going to pull the smoke out of the hallways. And they aren't going to erase the terror my child just went through. He dropped his head. I am going to testify. Everything she did, everything I know, I will tell the police. I looked him dead in the eyes. Don't do it for me. Do it for your daughter. Assuming you still remember she's your daughter. He froze, then gave a slow, devastating nod. By noon the next day, the Chicago police found Marlo hiding in a dingy motel near O'Hare Airport. She was completely broken. Her duffel bag contained nothing but a few of Declan's old toys and a stack of promissory notes to Garrett Thorne. Garrett himself was picked up in Miami later that day on federal extortion charges. When Blair called to give me the news, I was sitting by the window, feeding Ainsley. The afternoon sun bathed my daughter's face in a warm, peaceful light. Marlo confessed, Blair said. She claims she just wanted to scare you and didn't mean to trigger the whole building. But the arson charge, the cameras, and the audio threats are ironclad. And Sloan, this gives us a nuclear option for the divorce. Extreme endangerment. You're getting everything. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt drained. This war had dragged so many people through the mud, but at least, from today on, no one could ever accuse me of overreacting when it came to protecting my baby. That afternoon, the official court summons arrived in the mail. I held the heavy linen envelope, looked at Ainsley, and whispered, "It's almost over, little bird." The day of the final divorce hearing was dreary, rain slicking the streets of downtown Chicago. I wore a tailored, slate blue midi dress. My incisions still ached if I moved too fast, but the pain was a grounding reminder of how my body had been abandoned at its most vulnerable. Mom stayed home with Ainsley. Blair walked beside me, carrying a litigation briefcase twice as thick as it was on day one. Vance stood alone outside the courtroom doors. He had lost at least 15 pounds. The smug superiority that used to force me to yield was entirely eradicated. Seeing me approach, he took a half step forward and stopped, as if finally realizing that some chasms cannot be crossed with a simple, "I'm sorry." Sloan. Today, I'm going to tell the judge the absolute truth. I looked at him with utter calm. You should have done that from the very beginning. He looked down and said nothing. Constance was there too, sitting on a bench down the hall. She didn't dare raise her voice anymore. After the police reports, the arson, the exposure of Declan's paternity, she looked like she had aged 20 years in a month. I felt zero pity for her. A woman who only loves her grandchildren as status symbols doesn't deserve the title of grandmother. The hearing lasted much longer than anticipated. At first, Vance's attorney made a half-hearted attempt to argue for joint custody, citing Vance's wealth and the need for paternal bonding, but Blair was an executioner. She laid out the evidence chronologically. The hospital audio, the revoked HIPAA forms, the CPD reports, the lobby security footage, the Northwestern Memorial injunction against harvesting cord blood, and finally, the felony arson indictment against Vance's paramour. With every piece of evidence, another layer of the Sterling family's respectability was violently stripped away. No further insults were needed. The facts were devastating enough. Then it was Vance's turn to speak. He stood up. His voice was raspy, but clear. I concede. I was entirely in the wrong. On the day my daughter was born, I said horrific, unforgivable things. I admit that my mother and I subjected Sloan to severe emotional distress. I am withdrawing my petition for joint physical custody. I agree that Ainsley should live exclusively with her mother. I only ask for the right to supervised visitation, as deemed appropriate by the court, and I will pay maximum statutory child support. Constance whipped her head toward him, her lips trembling. Vance! He didn't even look at her. Mom, stop. We have destroyed enough. Hearing him say it, I felt absolutely nothing. If I were the Sloan from 4 years ago, I might have wept tears of joy that my husband was finally defending me. But now, it was just too late. It was so late that everything had already burned to ash. Even if he tried to sweep it up, he would only dirty his hands. The judge issued the ruling after a short recess. The marriage was dissolved. I was granted sole legal and physical custody of Ainsley. and she legally retained the surname Kensington. Vance was ordered to pay substantial child support. Visitation was restricted to a neutral, court-appointed family center under professional supervision. He was legally barred from taking her to the Lake Forest estate without my explicit written consent. The financial restitution was bifurcated into a civil suit, with a summary judgment ordering Vance to liquidate equity to repay the $500,000 plus extracted from my premarital accounts under fraudulent pretenses. When the judge struck the gavel and said the word divorced, I didn't cry. I just let out a long, shuddering exhale. It felt like I had been locked in a windowless room for 4 years, and I finally heard the deadbolt slide open. Walking out of the courthouse, Vance called my name. Sloane, can I just see a picture of Ainsley? Just one? I stopped, pulled out my phone, opened a photo of Ainsley sleeping, and held the screen up, keeping a physical distance between us. He stared at the screen for a long time. His eyes filled with tears. She looks exactly like you. I put the phone away. She is going to grow up to look like herself. She doesn't need to look like anyone else to be loved. He choked back a sob. I turned and walked away. This time, he didn't try to follow me. Months later, Marlowe was convicted of reckless endangerment, filing a false police report, and felony arson. Garrett Thorne was sentenced to federal prison for extortion. Declan was officially placed in the foster care system while social workers hunted for a viable relative. I never saw the boy again, but sometimes I remembered the look in his eyes when he asked if I hated him. I truly hope that one day he realizes the sins of the parents do not belong to the children. Children are just the casualties of adult greed, ego, and lies. 6 months later, Ainsley learned how to roll over. I had started taking on lucrative freelance consulting contracts. It wasn't tech billionaire money, but it was my money. Every can of organic formula, every little pink onesie, was bought with my own labor, my own independence. This condo wasn't a temporary post-divorce bunker anymore. It was a home filled with laughter, the smell of my mom's cooking, and fresh white hydrangeas on the counter. Vance's first supervised visitation took place at a downtown family therapy center. Blair went with me. Vance sat across the sterile playroom. His hands shook so violently he didn't even dare reach out to touch Ainsley. She looked at him with bright, clear eyes, then immediately turned and reached her little arms out to me. I picked her up, and she buried her soft face into the crook of my neck, entirely trusting and safe. Vance watched us, his voice a broken whisper. You're doing an amazing job, Sloane. I smiled down at my daughter. I know. That night, after putting Ainsley in her crib, I sat by the window, watching the city traffic fade into the dark. I used to believe that marriage was an institution where you simply endured things to keep the peace. But surviving this nightmare taught me the truth. A family is not built on the infinite, silent suffering of a woman. And it is certainly not built on the tears of a child. If love requires a mother to bow her head to contempt, that love is toxic waste. In the end, I didn't keep my husband. I didn't keep his prestigious last name. I didn't keep the illusion of a perfect, wealthy family for the country club to admire. But I kept myself. I kept my daughter. And I kept the right to live a peaceful, unburdened life without ever needing to ask for permission again. This story of a wife betrayed in the maternity ward, a mother-in-law obsessed with male heirs, a manipulative mistress, and a brutal custody war is a masterclass in marriage, self-respect, and female resilience. When you are being abused, the answer isn't petty revenge. The answer is keeping a lethally clear mind to protect yourself and your children. Gather the evidence, weaponize the law, and find the absolute courage to walk out of the fire. I hope this story reminds women to value themselves. Never mistake infinite patience for a strategy to keep a man. Protect your children with surgical precision, and never let them become collateral damage in adult wars. Demand respect for your money, your labor, and your empathy. Do not let your kindness be treated as an ATM. When faced with injustice, do not scream document, lawyer up, and let the courts do the screaming for you. Because true happiness isn't dragging a rotting marriage to the finish line. True happiness is finding the ruthless courage to walk away from the people hurting you and building a beautiful, quiet life from the ashes of the life you burned down.